Hey guys, Tom here. Well, this is not on the list of the top 20 or top 10 jobs that I want to do in the wintertime in Massachusetts, but it's got to be done because I really can't move forward with anything on the inside of this engine bay until I get it cleaned out. So that's what I'm going to set to do today. It's about 37, I think, out here and windy, but it's above freezing and it's not gusting winds for the first time in over a week, and the forecast just doesn't call for warmer weather. So got to do what you got to do. So we're going to spray this thing down with some degreaser, and then we're going to hit it with the power washer. I'm going to try to do this all as fast as I possibly can so I don't freeze to death. So I'm using the good old purple stuff, super clean. We're going to use this and just spray in liberally around everywhere that we want to hit. That's not working right. I think we need the stream. There we go, that's a little better. So we're just going to get this all liberally in here. The goal of this is really just to make sure that we can get in here and clean stuff that we normally couldn't get to or gain access to, and clean it out. Stuff that is going to be covered up once we get this thing reassembled. So similar to what we did with the iRock, just giving this thing a very good bath. I'm not worrying too much about the wiring because there's not too much wiring exposed. And we're going to be either redoing a wiring harness, meaning like I kind of rig it up myself, or we're going to be buying a new one. But we're going to definitely service what's in there now. So no worries about, or no real big worries about what happens to it. Slide. So the plan will be to scrub this thing down with a wire brush or the 3M pad or both, or even more once it's all cleaned out. But parts of this are really kind of gunked up and grody and greasy, so always helpful to get a good strong degreaser cleaner in here and hose everything down. We'll just take the big gunks off so that the job of cleaning and roughing this up later will be that much easier. Alright, so power washer's out. Had a little minor mishap with the hose, sort of thing blew apart. Fixed that, now we're on to hosing this down. So my spray bottle of cleaner wasn't working as well as I wanted it to. So I added the detergent, the undiluted degreaser into the soap dispenser on this thing. We got the soap nozzle on. So we're gonna hose everything down with that, and hopefully that gets us in a better shape. Everything's soaked up. Now I'm doing what you're not supposed to do with this thing, which is to run hot water through here. Fortunately, my spigot inside the garage will run hot water, so I'm running hot water through here. I'm hoping it's just going to clean things up a little bit faster and keep things from cooling off too much. So that hotter water should be able to get the grease off. Let's see how it goes. That's it. Only took me like 20 minutes to get this done. It wasn't a huge Herculean effort. It worked a trick though. I'm going to roll the car in and show you guys how it worked. Alright, so hopefully you guys can see this okay. The light's much better inside here, so this really worked. So you can see how much that actually stripped off all that grease and grime, a fair amount of the paint. We're down to bare metal in some spots on that frame. this is really great stuff. So clean enough so that I can just come back in here with abrasives, whether that's a Scotch pad or whether that's a wire wheel or a wire brush or all of the above. I can just come back in here and get the sucker cleaned. I did find a bolt that would fit. It's an NPT bolt to fit into the power steering pump so that that's not going to get water in it. And we put a little plug on the other open end. So those who are going to freak out about that, no need to, we're covered. But we got pretty much everything here, and it stripped it pretty clean. Now it's not polished clean. The desire here was really to get the heavy grease and gunk off. Anything that I was going to need sort of a power washer or a hose and a lot of water for. Now that we've done that, we should be ready to sort of come in here with some dirty, grimy clothes and be able to take care of the rest of it with just localized cleaning and scrubbers and wire wheels, and that'll come next. This is something that I'm picking apart here over time. All right, so the engine bay is clean now. We've given it a good scrub. It's about as clean as I can really expect it to be at this point. The next piece of this is to really start getting in there and getting some wire scrubbing done. Because really we need to get this thing real clean. My eventual plan here, what I'm hoping to do in this video, is to get the engine bay clean to the point where I can actually spray some fillable primer. And I'm going to do that to cover up the multitude of scratches and imperfections that are all over the firewall and all over the fender wells, so that I can then spray it with a satin, which is a pretty low reflective paint, which should hide a multitude of sins, so that I can get a pretty smooth, pretty good looking paint job on the inside of this thing when it's done. Again, it's not a show car, but I like this thing to look as neat as possible. But before I get into all that stuff, one of the things that I want to do is make as much room as I can for me inside of this thing, and that requires taking all the wiring out of this. Now, I've already spared you the detail and minutia of the labeling of the wires that I did. This is super important, but it wasn't super important to take you through. So I spared you that. You're welcome. But I did label every single connection that was in this thing. All of the lights, everything that had an open connection that was already connected to something, I labeled. So that I can make sure I know where it goes back to. And I do think I'm going to redo this wiring harness. That is also hopefully going to be in this video too. So I'm now going to disconnect the wiring harness from the firewall and pull that out and set it aside. And that's going to be something that we're going to mess with while we're doing things like letting paint dry. So let's get on to that next. All right, so try to get in here with this ratchet and see. The way this thing goes on here is basically with just one bolt, one long bolt. So if we can get in here to remove it, we should be good. I think I may be able to get in here and just spin this with the socket alone now. Yep.
Yes.
Pretty loose. Fortunately, this thing isn't really torqued in here. It's not like it's trying to bear a ton of weight or that it gets put up with a ton of force. So it's just loosely bolted in. So I've looked at replacing this engine harness. All in, shipped to me, probably about 250 bucks. It's a bunch of money. It's probably worth it, but there's a couple of things that I'm looking at here. The first is that technically there's nothing a whole lot easier about replacing this engine wiring harness when the engine is out than when the engine is in. In other words, this job that I'm doing right now, pretty much just as easy to do when the engine is in here as it is when the engine is out. The only reason I'm really removing this now is because I need to get the wiring harness out of here to make room for myself as I clean this engine bay. But I could replace it at any time with the engine in here and it wouldn't bother me one bit. So I'm not in an urgent hurry to replace this. So I'm not dying to spend that money. And as you guys know, all of this costs money. And if you don't need to spend $250 to get the cars running, then you're probably better off spending that $250 someplace else. More associated bundling. Ugh. Man. This is part of the reason why I want to look at redoing some of this wiring. So much of it is ad hoc by me and then by other people. It's been just layered onto. I'm not a big wiring guy, so I don't have a huge amount of confidence going into this, but I kind of feel like if I start from square one, which would be the original wiring schematic for the car, I kind of feel like I can get this back to something that makes sense. And at least that I'll understand and can maybe document. So I'll have something to go off of, which will be better than this craziness, which oftentimes does not make any sense. I don't necessarily think there's anything in here that's dangerous. But there are definitely things in here that don't make any sense. For sure.
It's like that.
Wiring is out. So we managed to pull that whole harness out. We've got a lot more open space in here, and it is now time to get scrub-a-dubbing. So the real places that I'm looking for is any place where there's going to be some real rust. And you can see I got some here, some surface rust on that cross member, a little bit of surface rust on the frame there, some surface rust here, a little bit there. There's always surface rust to be found wherever your battery is, and a little bit more on the radiator support. Any of those places where I'm going to find a little bit of rust, I am going to take a wire wheel to, so that I can just break off as much of that rust as possible. And then hopefully, after we get done with that, I will just spray any of that stuff with a rust encapsulator, a rust fix. And then the next step will be to sand everything else. And the goal there is really to hit it with, I'll grab out the palm sanders and some decent grit paper, and we'll sand down everything else that's here. You can see there's some real like orange peel and graininess, and there's some dents and dimples. I'm not going to worry about pounding this stuff out. I'm not going to get too insane about this stuff and smoothing it out, but I would like to make sure that I make the surface at least as smooth as I can. So we'll do that by hitting it with a fillable primer. That will cover some of the surface sins and some of the scratches and stuff like that, and we'll take care of it. And then we will, once we've got that sanded and primed, we'll move on to hitting it with some masking, and then we'll paint. And that's the plan. And then in between those steps, as things are drying, I will be taking on the mess of that wiring and seeing if I can't remake myself a wiring harness, or at least work on that one that's there and clean it up a bit. So, next steps. Yeah, this is comfortable. Yeah. Let's sit like this for a while. I want to stay here. Yeah, it's good. I could, like for a month, I could sit like this. By the way, reusing these wire brushes, at some point, the brush is going to still have lots of meat on it, but it's going to stop cleaning so well. Take a look at it. You'll notice all the bristles are twisted in one direction. Reverse the direction on your gun. It'll start cleaning well again. And then eventually it'll stop cleaning so well. Reverse the direction on your gun again. It'll start cleaning better. Little pro tip. see, it looks pretty good. Pardon the foot, but I'm in crap spaces in here. The goal of that wire brushing was not to remove all rust. You're not really going to do that successfully until you really sort of grind out, and then you're going to remove good material too. The goal was to remove the loose surface rust. Then we're going to spray this stuff with something that's basically going to fix this rust. This rust doesn't concern me. It's not troubling, and it's not something that is structurally of a concern, but we don't want it to go any further. So we really just want to arrest it. So all we really want to do is get this stuff cleaned up, remove the heavy loose stuff, stop it where it stands, and get all this stuff covered, which is what we're going to do. We're on to the next step now. So the next step, after we've already cleaned all the rust, or the loose surface rust out of everything, is we've got to go through and clean this before we can spray it. And now I've been watching paintification, which I got turned on to by watching Vice Grip Garage. Derek actually worked with Kevin, who runs the Paintification channel, and I started watching Kevin's channel and started watching him doing painting, and love that channel. He's got a lot of good information to give, and if you are interested in doing any kind of painting at all, anything from just rattle can painting to pro painting, he's got a lot of good feedback, a lot of good information. And one of the pieces that I really pulled from him that I think is really important and that I had always overlooked is that when it comes to cleaning surfaces, there's really two steps. The first one is you have to remove sort of mechanical contaminants. That's dirt and debris. And to do that, all you really need is a regular cleaner. I love the Sprayway glass cleaner stuff. This stuff is pretty cheap. I can get this in bulk. You can get it from Amazon. Spray this on. This is going to wipe away dirt and loose debris, the leftover rust that didn't come off when I blew off the rust. That's going to take away the surface dirt contaminants in here. That's easy. But the second piece after that is actually the solvents, the greases and the waxes and the stuff that is not going to get removed quite as easily. And for that, you need a wax and grease remover. You can use naphtha. I've just got this wax and grease remover that I just got from O'Reilly. A little bit goes a long way. You don't have to hose that stuff down, so one bottle's going to last you a while. That has to be used to get all of the sort of solvent-based stuff off of the material so that the paint can actually stick to the material that you're spraying to, in this case, metal. If you don't do one of those two steps, you're in trouble. Because the Sprayway stuff, that's not going to remove the solvent. And the wax and grease remover isn't necessarily going to remove the dirt. So you got to do those two steps to get there. It can be annoying, but if you don't do those two steps, you are going to find yourself with a crappy paint job. And you don't want to go through all this work and get a crappy paint job. So I do the prep now. Be a cheap bugger for a lot of things, but I found in my old age that shop towels, these little blue things, I'll spend the money on them, man. They do a reasonably good job of being lint free, and you got to use a lot of them sometimes to clean, so no substitute. I kind of hate spending the money on them, but I sort of find I buy once, acquire once. I sort of get a big box of them and then forget about it until I need another big box of them, and there's usually enough time that passes in between them that it doesn't make me upset. Tend to do the same thing with razor blades because they set me off the same way. So this particular flavor of stuff that we're going to use today is from Duplicolor. It's called Rust Fix. So this stuff is supposed to stop rust and create a smooth surface that we can paint on, so it's not the big rubberized stuff. I've got some of that too, but I'm not really interested in turning this into a rubber coating situation. So this stuff should spray on clear, and then as it dries, it's going to turn black. Particularly, it's going to turn black on the rust. So let's give this a shot. Just like that, fix is in. So the rust fix is applied. We gotta let this sit for a little bit, let this dry up. Technically, we're supposed to wait 24 hours for this to set before we can paint. We'll see if I actually respect that timing or not. My gut tells me I might not. I may hit this with primer before that, but I'm gonna give it a while anyway before I go and hit it with that. I may still come back here and do some work on the firewall and do some sanding before we get to that. But for now, I will turn my attention to the wiring, grab my wiring diagrams, and see if I can't start to pick that stuff apart, figure out what's going on there, and also do myself a little run to the store for some more fillable primer while we let this stuff dry. But it did do what looks like a pretty good job. It went on real easy. Confused me a little bit because there was no ball in the can, so it just shakes up like a can of hairspray. Shook it for about 5 minutes to make sure I was doing it right. But it did spray on nice and easy, not terribly fumy, and it is turning that rust from a red color to basically black as it's drying. You have to do the coats on pretty quickly. I want you to do the two coats in no less than 2 minutes apart, or no more than 2 minutes apart, I should say. So you got to hit them pretty quickly, which I did. So we're going to give this some time, and we'll see how it goes. So after considerable searching, I just realized that I do not have the right grit of sandpaper. It seems that I have 120 grit, which is enough to just take all the paint off, or I have like 1500 grit, which is enough to do like a cut and buff. But I don't have like 300 or 400 grit, which is what I'm really looking for, or even like 220, to be able to bring the paint that's in here down. So since I'm not going to run out to the store again right now, that's for later, I'm going to go to Scotch-Brite. So if you look it up on the charts, Scotch-Brite pads, the maroon pads, I think they're in like the 320, 400 range for grit on sandpaper. And since we're not doing exactly finished body work, I think we're going to stick with this. And we'll give this a shot. We're really just hitting the fender walls here and hitting the firewall. I shouldn't say fender walls, inner fenders. You guys know what I meant. And fender wall. Words are hard. Inner fenders and firewall. And we just want to knock these down. I'm hoping to be able to get some filler primer on those tonight. I think I am going to respect the authority of the Duplicolor folks who make this rust fix. I'm not going to spray over that tonight. I'm going to give that the full 24 hours to dry, because in some of the spots where it laid on a little bit heavy, it is still a little tacky. So I'm going to let that sit for the full 24. But I would like to get a coat of the filler primer on the fender walls so that I can sand that down. Because the fenders and the firewall is what I'm really concerned about making look good. The rest of the stuff, I'm just worried about getting a coat of paint over it. So those I'll probably still throw filler primer on tomorrow. That won't need a long time to set before I spray it. So the hope is get these things set tonight, get a little bit of masking over the paint on the car, hit it with some filler, walk away from this tonight, and then come back in tomorrow night, give it a light sand, and hope that it's ready for either a second coat of filler or primer, or just hit it with the paint. But tomorrow night, the goal will be to walk away from this thing with a coat of the satin black on it so that we can be done with the compartment here. And then just waiting on a wiring harness to throw into this bad boy to get it all wired up. That's the plan. All right, so just stay calm and don't panic. Don't panic, just stay calm. It's all gonna be okay. Yep, it's all gonna be fine. Yep. So, in case there was any question, I wasn't talking to you. Yeah, that's for me. This is a lot of wiring. And I'm nervous, admittedly. This is a bunch of wiring to figure out, but the good news is these cars at their core are pretty shockingly simple. So there's not a ton to go through here, really. So we should be able to get through this. And there was nothing wrong with this wiring, per se. So it's not like we have a lot of gremlins to figure out. So we do have the block that's here. So you can see the back side of this block, it's all kinds of gunked up. So we're going to clean this up first off and see if we can't get this a little bit nicer looking, a little bit more cleaned up. It's all kinds of munged up. We're going to cut the wrappings off of this because it's basically all wire taped up, and see if we can start identifying most of these wires. And to do that, I got help. So this is the 1970 Chevelle wiring diagram. So I'm going to be relying on this heavily, and my bifocals, to help me make sure that I label this. So I'm going to go through probably a bit off camera here, or maybe in speedy time-lapse fashion, go through and try to make sure that I can identify all of these parts and pieces. And I'm going to go through and try to label all of these wires. Depending upon how this looks, I've got sort of two solutions in my brains for how I think I want to handle this. One solution is that this looks good and we just kind of clean this up and just identify all the wires. And if there are splices to make in these wires, we just make them super, super clean. All right, we just go in and make those splices really nice with solder and shrink wrap and really make those splices perfect so that they're not going to be a problem for us in the future. The other potential is that we don't like the look of some of these wires, and maybe some of them are crispy critters or a little bit dried out or just looking not so healthy. And if that's the case, then my backup plan, again, for the sake of cost, is going to be that I may just order some Deutsch connectors. For those who don't know, Deutsch connectors are sort of the modern automotive connector splices. Those are junction blocks that are basically weather tight. So they have seals in them. They snap together really tightly. They're basically waterproof. And my thinking is that I can get some Deutsch connectors so that I can terminate these wires close to the block with Deutsch connectors and then run all new wires here after. And if I do that, I can basically have a new wiring harness from here out with those Deutsch connectors here out. It's not perfect. That's not ideally the way that you would really run this thing and be like super happy with yourself. But it would be a way to fix some tired wires in this chain and get us by for now. So it may be what we do. We'll stay tuned and figure out what I'm going to do here. I tried to show this in another video, but I realized that the content got killed. So let's try to show it to you now. You guys are all familiar with these things. Cheapy razor wires. These are not, or razor cutters. These are not ideal for like heavy duty cutting, but I actually find them tremendously good, especially these little skinny kind. For doing some finer cutting, like around masking, or if you're going to try to cut wire enclosures and stuff like this. But one of the things that I learned in art school, because that's where I went to school, is that there's no substitute for a nice sharp blade. You should always try to get sharp blades. It's for this reason that I usually pick up a handful of these things every time I go to Harbor Freight or the hardware store. So what you may not know, these are snap-off blades. I think everybody knows that. But for years, embarrassingly, I always just grabbed a pair of pliers to snap these off. You don't need to because it's built in. The butt end of this thing comes off. And there's a little slot inside here that's designed for the blade to go into. And you just snip it off. And in this case, I'm going to snip off two because I've been cutting some stuff. And it's caught both parts of that blade. There you go. Replace that back in. We got a nice new sharp blade, and I never had to go get a tool. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right, so now let's try to see if we can get some of this stuff off of here. I guess we'll start with the stuff that I created, which is this overwrap. This is that Tessa tape that I put on here. If I had to guess, I'd say somebody has been in here and messing with this because it looks like what's coating these wires is electrical tape. So I'm going to guess preemptively that when I go back and read the schematic, my colors of wires may be off and different from factory. But I'll hold off on cursing out previous owners just yet until I can confirm my thinking. But, you know, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
Okay.
So I'm not really particularly good at wiring, no matter what I might tell you at any point in time. It's not necessarily my cup of tea. Kind of wish it was, but I do have a healthy respect for a clean wiring job. So this kind of wiring I'm not really terrified of. If I can work with a map or a blueprint, I can read a schematic okay, so I can get by in this instance and sort of read my way through in remap. Troubleshooting electronics is, well, that's where I run into a nightmare. I just don't have enough expertise behind it and enough experience. And a certain amount of electrical is still black magic to me. Unfortunately, I wish I knew it better.
Wrong. See.
All right, so you guys can see it's represented pretty well in the schematic here. We've got two blocks, the bigger block and the smaller block. One fits into the other. And you can see that here. This is the smaller block, this is the bigger block. So we're working on this smaller block right now. And they dovetail into one another. So let's just detach this. And let's see if we can't do some maths to figure out what each of these wires do. And get these bad boys labeled. You know what I love is when I go searching for something and I can't find it, and the reason that I can't find it is because I actually put it away where it belongs. Classic. All right, so what we're going to do is wire by wire, based on the color coding here, which I think I can see. I'm going to label them. Unfortunately, after taking all of this stuff apart, taking all the mucky, gross, worn out wiring tape off, and inspecting these wires, I'm not finding a whole lot of wires that are just completely shot. But what I am finding is a whole bunch of pretty ugly splices, stuff like this going on. There's a whole bunch of sensors that I wasn't using, but I am going to use now, that are dead-ended enough that I would have to make a whole bunch of new splices. This is just starting to look like it's going to probably be too much of a nightmare for me to think that I can sort of just refurb this wiring harness on its own. So I do still potentially have the option of rerunning or remaking some of this wiring harness myself, and sort of redoing it on my own. But I am realizing there's enough like 12 gauge wire in here that I don't have a lot of, that I'd have to buy. And so when I start realizing, well, now I got to buy 12 gauge wire, it may actually be more cost effective for me to buy a new wiring harness, which bites. I don't like the idea of having to spend the money on it, but I really hate the idea of putting something that's this disjointed and crispy in here. Plus, if I'm being honest, every connection that I'm looking at in here is shot. They're all pretty crispy. I mean, look at the inside of this thing. That is just rough. All of them are. So I'd hate to go big. I mean, we're putting a brand new crate motor in this thing. I'd hate to go big with that and then stop up short for what, in the grand scheme of things, is short money for a wiring harness. So I'm going to sleep on it, think about it a little bit more, think about my potential options. But I mean, look at this fusible link. I mean, it's just, come on. There's just there's too much Mickey Mouse stuff in here for me to feel good about just kind of patching this up and putting it back. And I suspect that by the time I got done buying connectors and buying new wiring, and then putting my time into remaking a harness, I'm probably better off just buying a new one. So I may do that, but I'll tell you this, I don't regret taking this apart. I don't regret the time that I spent taking this apart and running through the schematic and looking at it, because it has helped me out a bit. So it has helped me orient myself a little to the electronics and the wiring in the car. And that's a good thing. Right? Whenever you know a little bit more about the car and what you're doing with the car, it's good. So I'll take that and run with it. All right, everything's all cleaned off, ready to go. So we're about to get spraying with primer. I'm gonna wear a mask with this one, so not a lot of talking going on. But we're gonna get started, spray this one up quick, and then I'm done for the night. We'll let this stuff dry. We'll come back the next day after everything's dried off, and then we'll get back to business again. So this is what you typically call the high build or a filler primer. This is not a professional grade stuff. This is just in a can. Not exactly the best stuff you can get, but the difference between this and a sort of a standard primer is that this stuff is pretty thick. So it lays on fairly thick intentionally so that it can fill in some more aggressive scratches and not dings, but imperfections, let's say. So the idea is that this actually builds a thickness onto whatever you're spraying, so that once it's dry, you can go back and sand it, and you'll get a smoother finish. Not always what you need, but in this case, when we're dealing with uneven surfaces, it's going to do the trick. I hope. Well, so there we go until tomorrow night. One more step done. So we got a first coat and a half, maybe you call it 2 coats, of the high build primer in there. Already seeing some spots that, despite my best efforts, must not have gotten cleaned well enough because the primer didn't seem to sit as well as I want it to. Hopefully we'll be able to just sort of sand that out and take it off, take another shot at it tomorrow. We'll hit it with some more sanding and some primer tomorrow. Tomorrow, the hope is that we can just come at this and sand and get right into either one more coat of primer and sanding or just sand and paint. We'll see how it turns out. If I can sand this smooth tomorrow and it looks good, we'll just jump straight into paint and we'll hit it with the satin black and fog the whole thing. Otherwise, we'll hit another coat of primer on it tomorrow, sand that, give it a little time to flash, and then we'll hit it with paint. But one way or another, I think we're hitting this with paint tomorrow, and I think we can wrap this project up and I can get to editing because this thing has taken me several days of doing this work, sort of piecemealing this together, which is why you haven't seen Declan in any of this. Partially that's because this is the Chevelle stuff, but partially it's because I've been just doing this catch as catch can, trying desperately to get this thing ready for when we're good with all the parts to be able to put the engine back in it, in between all the work that we're doing on the motor. So we got just too many projects to do. And it's hard to get everybody wrangled into one spot to hit with the teamwork. So this is like whenever I can grab some time. So see you tomorrow. So this is her. We get her all primed up. This is all the high build primer. We managed to get in there, fill everything up. I'm not going to take any masking off because we're going to leave that all in there as we get ready. You'll notice there's some sand or dust in here too. I've already started sanding a little bit just to try to be able to get this ready for paint. I had been hopeful, but it's not all quite ready yet, so we're going to have to wait on the painting round. But so far, so good. I think we're going to be looking much, much better than we were before. Well, sometimes it happens this way. I was really hoping to be able to get this thing wrapped up and painted black for this episode so that I could sort of end this on a high note, have this whole thing blacked out and be able to show you what it looks like all dolled up. Not going to happen. I did manage to get 3 whole cans of buildable primer laid into this piece, all inside, as you guys saw, and it's looking pretty good right now. I did get to sand that down in spots, but in other spots, particularly where I laid it on pretty thick, like on the fender walls where I really want to smooth it out, it's still a little bit too wet, still too soft for me to be able to sand. So I got to let it set up more, and so I'm not going to be able to hit it with black. And unfortunately, I've got too many commitments at night this week to be able to wait too much longer to be able to spray this. So I'm going to have to wrap this video so I can get onto the editing process and get this ready for you guys this week. So we will see a continuation of this. I will show you guys it all painted black before too long, so you will be able to see it wrapped up. And I'll probably just drop that into another video rather than running something separate on this. But in the meantime, I did want to share with you that I did look up more on a wiring harness and what I'm going to do there. I told you that I was going to sleep on it, and I did. And I looked up more on those wiring harnesses. Turns out that I actually need 2. So I need the engine wiring harness, and I also need the lighting wiring harness. Both of those together is over $500. There is no way, guys, that I'm spending $500 on that wiring harness.
So I actually priced out, I double checked my wiring stock, and I priced out buying a wire that I didn't have, buying all the connectors that I don't have that would be the appropriate connectors. And it looks like for something like $120 or $130, I can get everything I need to actually build my own wiring harness. So that's what I'm planning to do. So I'm going to refurb this wiring harness. I'm going to take out these wires, clean everything up, replace them all with the new wires. The good news there is that there are several wires, according to the schematic, that I'm not using. Smog-related stuff that's not on this engine anymore. That's some of the dead-ended wires that were in here. I'm going to be able to pull those out. I'm also going to be able to rewire for the HEI. That's not wired correctly in this car right now. It should be using a heavier gauge wire than it is. So I'm going to be able to wire that properly so that it comes right out of the wiring harness. So we're going to be able to clean it up significantly and make it look a lot better. And I'm also going to be able to route it inside the fender well here so that we're going to be able to make it look a lot prettier, a lot cleaner. We won't see as much junk going on. It's going to be a neater presentation. So kind of looking forward to that. I think that'll probably be its own video piece probably that we'll put together to show you at least how I would do that. I haven't made a full harness before, so part of this is going to be new for me. But all of that coming on a future video. I appreciate the heck out of you guys tuning in and watching. And I realize that this stuff is kind of a struggle right now. You're on the struggle bus watching us do all this sort of extra stuff, and it's not really that exciting to watch us doing all the pre-work that's leading up into this. But the good stuff is coming, guys. We do have to get all this prep work out of the way so that we are ready to put the engines into these cars, and that stuff is on its way. We do have some stuff that's inbound on the old UPS truck, parts for the 350 transmission for this car, to a shift kit for this, and a new pan for it, so that we can get that transmission ready to go, so we can clean that up. That'll be an episode upcoming. Then we've got a torque converter that's going to be coming in that we're going to be replacing in that so that we have the right torque converter for this motor. And that's going to be close to everything we need for that engine to get this thing going. And then we've got a few parts that we need to put into Declan's 350 to be able to mount that into the Camaro. We are getting closer to be able to get all this stuff together. It's getting there. I promise we're going to be able to get it going. And it's going to be exciting once this weather hits and it starts to get warm. We're going to have both of these cars running. And maybe for a change, we can actually show you some videos with some rolling wheels. Wouldn't that be fun? All right, guys. Thanks for watching. As always, we appreciate it if you like and subscribe to the channel. And throw in some comments. We're always happy to answer them. And we'll see you real soon. And until then, keep on throwing wrenches.